I'll give you a kind of an idea of a bit of how it works for some people. For one woman, her husband, and I gave you the Ann Landers, but this was another situation with a woman who found out her husband had had multiple affairs and had lied a lot about the whole thing. And so her first reaction was rage, feeling of betrayal, lying bastard, contempt, hate. How could he do this to me and the kids? She had two, one in middle school, one in high school. And she came to me and said, how am I supposed to forgive him? And my response was, don't even try. That's not where you are right now. Instead, what I had her do, because she had the story going, how could he, lying bastard, terrible person. I said, don't try to forgive him. Just let's see if you can take that story, put a picture frame around it, put it aside, and let's sense what's underneath it. So we did a little, in a much more full fashion, what I asked you to do. And what she found that underneath the story, what she was experiencing was this kind of rage, and I said, let it be as big as it is. And I'll just say kind of, completely let it explode, let it rip, let it be as much as it is. And it, I was in Bethesda at that time, it filled my office in Bethesda, and it filled the East Coast, and it just filled the planets and the solar system. It just got bigger and bigger, through the galaxies, outwards. Then on the edge of all that rage, she sensed something else, and I said, what's there? And she said, oh, well, underneath it is this fear that something is really wrong with me. And then, of course, I invited her, this is being mindful and present with what's there. Okay, let's be with that fear. And it was there's the storyline up, I'll never be loved, I'm not desirable. And then in the heart of that fear was this shame of, basic defect. And then with that came some loneliness. And so our practice, our process therapeutically, and this is something that sometimes we need to do in therapy and sometimes we can do it as part of our meditation, was to keep being with the rawness that was underneath the blaming stories. That is the process. And for her, it came to a place of deep self-compassion, that she could sense how much suffering there was in feeling I'm just not lovable, something's really wrong, till she could begin to bring a real kindness to that raw place. And that was maybe 8 months, where her whole practice was being with that rawness and bringing compassion, until she started feeling this shift. And the simplest way I can say it is that she went from being the victim of, some lying bastard and a victim who's basically unworthy, to a sense of a space of tenderness and awareness that could hold the wounded place. Her identity opened up. She could have never experienced that if she stayed in the blame, if she hadn't gone through that process of being with the rawness. So from that place, she could begin to look through the eyes of compassion at him, and just as our friend over here described, seek to understand, so what's going on? And for him, he was in one of those crises of being at a certain age and feeling like his life wasn't working out and disappointed and not so desirable himself, and he was playing that out. This is not her excusing him, just, okay, what was going on? She was able to forgive him and divorce him because she couldn't trust him. So this is an example of she was able to have him in her heart, but divorce him. And they could continue to raise their children and be co-parents without that bitterness that creates another generation of wounding. Do you know what I mean? It always does. Forgiving is not a one-shot. It's not like something happens and we process the pain and that person's forgiven. Especially if we're in an ongoing relationship, the patterns keep playing, we keep getting triggered, it's an ongoing thing. And the question is, do we want to lock into the narrative of you're wrong and then get fixed in a kind of distance between us and the other? Or are we willing to keep being with, and then from the place of having processed, speak with as much intelligence and compassion as we can? Can we choose that? The only way we have wisdom in navigating is if we're willing to go to where the rawness is. Otherwise, the dance keeps on replaying. And again, I want to say, if it's a repeating process in a relationship, it doesn't mean we don't insist on something being different. It's just that we first work with our own rawness so that when we speak and call for boundaries and make requests, it's coming from presence, not from a reactivity that we've been fueling with our storyline. It's a life process for most of us. We keep on encountering things that trigger old wounded places, so we keep on having to pay attention and let go. Each time we forgive, we become more familiar with an enlarged sense of our own being. Each time we forgive, we're on that path of true refuge. We've done the gateway of love. We discover more a sense of our own totality, the potential of our hearts to really love freely. Each time, that expanded sense of identity becomes more the truth, and we're less identified with the angry victim. That's freedom. Okay? We can't always do it on our own because sometimes the rawness is so much that we need support therapeutically. But we can do a certain amount, and we can certainly intend to forgive. If all you do is leave this particular session, after we do a little bit of a meditation on this, with a few degrees more commitment to this intention to forgive, to put more attention, letting blame be kind of a flag, saying, okay, I'm not going to just play out the story, I'm going to pay attention. Then what happens is that you've opened the gateway, just intending to forgive. Sometimes people say, well, I can see, when sometimes if there's been an affair, somebody's disappointed or let you down, but what about the real horrendous crimes? What about mass murderers, and when children are the ones that get injured and violated? What then? And just to say that no matter how awful the act, it still is a trance if we keep our heart in a fist of anger. We're still cut off from our wholeness and not seeing the wholeness of another person. No matter what the crime is or the violation, nobody is violent unless there's suffering inside them. It comes from suffering. I want to share with you, I've mentioned in the past a book I read called Tattoos on the Heart by Gregory Boyle. And he's a Catholic priest who writes about gang violence in the LA area. It's one of the area's most intense violence. And he set up a handful of businesses to help bring the kids that were so caught in that culture and give them a chance of a new life. Well, he describes the tragedies that happen in these neighborhoods. And one of these stories I want to share with you is about a woman, her name's Soledad. She's a mother of 4. And she was incredibly proud when her second oldest son got his diploma and went to the Marines. He was serving, she found out later, in Afghanistan. Comes back home for a visit, he goes out to pick up some fast food. She hears the shots on the street near the home, and her son Ronnie dies in her arms right outside the door. So he just come back from a visit after going off to serve. Soon after, her oldest son, his name's Angel, pulls off something few in the hood do. He graduates from high school, helps pull his mother through the hell she's living in. And 6 months after Ronnie's death, he pleads with her to put on some clothes, to, color, do her hair, and to be a mom for her 3 remaining children. He convinces her. Well, that afternoon, while eating a sandwich on their front porch, Angel's shot up by kids from a rival gang. So she's lost 2 of her sons to this gang violence. And Boyle, this priest, Gregory Boyle, writes that he found her later that day sobbing into a huge bath towel. The few of us there found our arms too short to wrap around this kind of pain. So Soledad's locked in the anguish of separation, and he spends a lot of time with her over the next few years. And at one meeting, when he asks her how she's doing with the losses, she tells him, I love the 2 kids I have. I hurt for the two that are gone. And then crying, she says, the hurt wins. The hurt wins. Okay? So then, a short time after, she's in the emergency room for chest pain, several months later. And a kid with multiple gunshot wounds is rushed in on a gurney to the spot next to her. And there's no curtain, so she's witnessed him fighting for his life. And she recognizes him as one of the kids from the rival gang that had killed her boys. And she knew that her friends might say, pray that he dies. But that's not what happened. As she hears the doctors yelling, we're losing him, something in her cracks open. And she says, I began to cry as I've never cried before, and started to pray the hardest I've ever prayed. Please don't let him die. Please don't let him die. I don't want his mom to go through what I have. So the boy survived, as did this woman's capacity for loving. It got ripped open by grief, and in time it became an unimaginable vastness. Some wisdom, some awake place in her knew that the only way to find some freedom was to completely forgive. So we release blame for our own freedom. We really do. It's like that image of holding a hot coal. Anger is like holding a hot coal. We release for our own freedom, and because we are entirely interdependent with the rest of this creation, every time we let go, every time we include others in our heart, there is some rippling out of consciousness. It's a waking up. It might not be the way we wish it would be, but I come back again at this point to those 2 wolves, that we are in an evolutionary process, all of us. And we've got this primitive brain that we need and that responds to danger. And we have a more recently evolved brain that has the empathy networks in them, the circuitry, has the capacity for mindfulness. And if we choose to cultivate it, and that's part of our evolutionary potential, we can actually choose to serve our own evolution. Our consciousness can choose to wake itself up. If you, in your daily life, start noticing where the blame is and not ride the narrative so much, you are doing more for the evolution of consciousness than almost anything else I can think of you doing. Because it stops the war. It's like, this is peace work. If we want to do peace work, it's not that we shouldn't also do the activist work that's more external, but this is the inner peace work that changes consciousness. Every time we have a blaming thought that somebody's wrong or bad, and instead of going down that track, we say, wait, and we have the courage to feel what's in our own bodies and hearts. There'll be a transformation of a sense of our own being, so that we'll be able to include the other in our heart and not perpetuate the cycles. So let's practice a little. Let's just close tonight with a few minutes of practice. And as you have the last few times in this pause, see if you can bring your awareness right into your body. Feeling the movement of the breath. You might feel into your heart. You can imagine smiling into your heart. Again, that's not to paper over anything, but to create some space, some flow. Choosing a relationship where you're carrying blame. And I would encourage you not to choose something where there's traumatic wounding, but just something where you're just living with some resentment, some judgment that you know is creating a distance. And let yourself feel what gives rise to your judgment. There's a reason we armor our hearts. And if you let the feeling underneath the judgment be as big as it is, the anger, the fear, the hurt, just notice what happens. What is it that really wants attention inside you? What's the vulnerability that's there? Is it that you feel rejected and hurt? Powerless, afraid? Is it that you're being asked to accept in some way a loss? And that there's disappointment and sadness, that the other is not the way you want them to be? Is it having to face a sense of your own self-mistrust? That sense of, I'm bad? Sense what's under there, under the judgment. And see if you can give yourself that gift of offering whatever vulnerability is there, a very deep presence right now. And it's very helpful to put the hand on the heart, because it's so rare that we offer a real tender presence, and that's what heals. So you might feel as you put your hand on your heart, vary the pressure, so it just feels like you're offering a witness, company, kindness inwardly. So if there's hurt there, if there's a sense of shame, personal failure, sadness, fear, offer it kindness. And just notice what happens. This step you take as long as you need when you're on your own, of just bringing that compassion to whatever feels difficult in you. And when you feel that you've arrived in a place that is tender towards your own being, then you can begin to look through the eyes of compassion at the other. And it's not to excuse, but rather just to see into that person's suffering. Can you see how that person in some way is being driven by fear, by confusion, by their own unmet needs? This is allowing you to put aside the veil of trance and see a more whole being. What's going on for that person? And if it feels difficult as you're looking to see a larger picture, if the mind keeps fixating on what's wrong, to be very forgiving towards that. And just know that it's your intention over time to let go of the aversion and to include this person and all beings in your heart. To have that intention opens the gateway to freedom. You might sense as you connect with compassion towards yourself and the other, what might be the wisest way to proceed in this relationship. If there's something to say, if there's a boundary to call, if you need to actually create distance in terms of your active relating, all that's possible, still keeping the heart tender and open. It's out of presence that we make the wisest decisions. It's out of presence that our actions are such that they stop the war and move us towards peace. Sensing the heart space that can hold your own vulnerability, that includes others, and widening it out now so you sense that really for these last few moments that your heart can include all beings everywhere. And we close with a simple prayer that all beings everywhere will wake up to the tenderness and fullness of a forgiving heart. That all beings everywhere will choose to stop the war. That all beings everywhere will realize their innate belonging. May there be peace on earth. May there be peace on earth. May there be peace everywhere. May all beings awaken and be free. Namaste and blessings.